So in thinking about the legal stuff, those guiding principles, I'm basically just kind of willed this down to what is absolutely essential for us as X-ray technologists. And the learning objectives that I've identified are these. We need to be able to explain the source of laws, where laws come from, define some important legal terminology. So this is, a lot of it's in Latin, right? But it's common terms that are used in court cases. We'll talk about tort law because that's the main form of law that applies to civil disputes, which are primarily the concerns that involve healthcare workers. And then we'll talk about negligence and ways to prevent negligence and explain ways to avoid malpractice lawsuits and also discuss the patient's rights. All right. So law, and this slide, it's got a lot of all caps. I'm trying to get rid of all the all caps, but for whatever reason it says, a system of principles and rules devised by organized society for the purpose of controlling human conduct. I don't know. My mom used to text me in all caps all the time, and it just felt like she was like yelling at me all the time. Ben! How are you? I'm fine, Mom. Take off the caps lock. All right. But the important thing here is that it's a legal system, right? And we don't need to like get into the weeds of all the legal system, but just know that there is a systematic approach to all things legal, and that, thank God, is the way our society works, right? U.S. society, we are innocent until proven guilty. Guess what? That's not the case in every country. You go to other countries, like for example, Mexico, they operate under what's called Roman law. You are guilty until proven innocent, right? So we have the benefits of certain legal systems and doctrines that we shouldn't take for granted. In the nutshell, though, in terms of the way democracy and United States law works, we are trying to protect individual autonomy, which means that individuals' rights to self-determination and freedom. So autonomy is a significant thing when it comes to the patient's rights. We will protect the patient's status as a human being, and that's been defined, in our Constitution and Bill of Rights and things like that, as a pursuit of happiness and life and things like that. And so we're interested again in making sure that those human rights are equitable and fair. We will avoid fraud and duress. Duress just means unneeded stress or anxiety related to the way someone's behaving. We will work to encourage healthcare practitioners to consider their decisions carefully. And when we think about the word carefully, what are we talking about? What's in the patient's best interest, right? That's what I think that word care means there. We want to encourage rational decision-making by the patient. I was just listening to something in the New York Times today about mental health self-determination clauses. If, for example, someone has a severe bipolar disorder, in a moment of rational thought, they can create a document that tells healthcare workers how they want to be taken care of if they're in the midst of a manic episode, right? So they can communicate what's their desires for the moments when they're feeling ill. And so those are important considerations for us to consider, not just with behavioral health issues, but also anytime the patient appears to be compromised. And we want to involve the public in medicine as much as possible. So where do the laws come from? Well, the primary document is going to be the Constitution, and this looks at the rights of all U.S. citizens, and frankly, even people who are not yet U.S. citizens, but who are striving to be U.S. citizens. It has limitations and balances of power, right? And we've seen how those have changed, frankly, even in the course of your lifetime. Things have altered the balance of power in our nation, right? One of the things that sticks out in my mind is the evolution of the Central Intelligence Agency, right? When the Constitution was developed, the CIA was not something that people thought about as a form of governance, but we've seen the CIA become a significant part of how the government works, and it operates largely without checks and balances. So when the CIA is requested to report to Congress, they may or may not show up to report to Congress, right? So my only point there is that there's limitations of power, and there's these ways that the government's to work to the benefit of all the public, but those limitations have changed over time. They've evolved over time. But right now, with the three branches that are recognized are the executive, legislative, and judiciary branches of government. Then there's administrative agencies, and those are what we work with quite a bit more in terms of radiography. So there's no part of the Constitution that says this is the way you should take an x-ray, right? There's no amendment to the Constitution that says anything about health care really at all. So we look more at administrative agencies like the Food and Drug Administration, OSHA, the National Radiation Commission, and organizations like that provide statutes for how radiation should be used. We also look at court decisions because depending on how the court has historically found certain rulings and cases that may seem similar to the case that we're looking at, a lot of times that sets what's called a precedent, and that precedent becomes something of a legal guiding rule. And so future cases might be decided based on, well, this is the outcome of Plessy versus Ferguson, for example. And then statutes. These are the laws that are enacted by the legislative branch. Legal terms. We're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about different types of legal terminology. Statutes are any kind of legislative measure, and they give us our established rules and laws, right? So everything from like which side of the road should we drive on to things within the hospital related to what is death defined as, how is birth determined, how is sex determined. All of those kinds of things have a legal statute that guides them. Our main concern in terms of thinking about statutes that relate to us as x-ray techs have to do with civil law. And civil law is those rights and responsibilities that individuals have to each other, right? So our government and the laws of our states and our respective cities create laws that deal with, like, okay, you as an individual should not speed on the interstate, right? That is a negotiation between you as an individual and the city or state in which you're driving, right? So what I'm talking about when I talk about civil law is there's also laws that guide, well, you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't speak badly about someone else, right? There are actual laws that guide those kinds of determinations, and that's what I'm talking about when I talk about civil law. So an example of a civil case that I had, this was such a crazy story from my own life, but when I was in x-ray school, I worked as a cook at a restaurant, and in the summer, the restaurant where I worked employed a lot of people who were recently released from prison, right? And a lot of them living in Utah were skinheads. So we had a real wild mix of people in this restaurant in the summertime. And there was a man that I met while I was working there who claimed that he had kind of had a conversion experience while he was in jail, right? So he had the old like skinhead tattoos and stuff, but he really was trying to set his life straight, right? Long story short, we started hanging out some. And I was just trying to be a positive influence in this person's life. And he stole some stuff from me, right? And I mean, I was a poor student, didn't have a lot going on for me, so I was like, I'm going to sue his butt, right? I don't know what else to do here. Like, I'm not the kind of person that's going to go pound on someone's door and say, give me my stuff back, right? And I don't know what all this person's connections are in terms of, like, Aryan Brotherhood or something freaky like that. So I sued him, and he no-showed at court, and that was a civil suit, right? It was a disagreement between persons, right? And so it was handled within civil court, right? It's a weird example. Yeah, this really happens.
What did he take?
It was a bike. He took a bike. I really cared about this bike too. It was a good bike. Maybe a possible better example. So I've included a lot of Far Side comics in this. Yeah, it just felt even worse. It's like, you took my bike. But in this far side example here, we have this man is being watched by a duck. He doesn't appreciate being watched by the duck. This is a disagreement between this man and the duck, right? So that is a civil disagreement.
Can you point out the duck?
Yeah, where is he?
He's really small on there. He's in the building right here.
Oh,
They look very similar, actually. So, legal terminology. What are we talking about when we talk about? And I hate these kind of PowerPoints. Oh my lord. Okay, so common law are those things that guide civil disputes, right? Those are principles, proper usages, rules, right? They're based largely on court decisions. So there's not a law out there that says if someone loans their bike to you, you have to give it back, right? Like you can't call the police and be like, hey, I loaned this guy my bike, and he's not giving it back, right?
Did you loan your bike?
It was a complicated situation, all right? so the situation evolves, right? The situation evolves. So what happens instead is like you look at previous situations, they're like, oh, case of Roberts versus the Aryan Nation. This guy loaned this skinhead his bike, and the skinhead didn't give him his bike back. So from that point on now, don't loan skinheads your bike, right? Like that's kind of the way that these decisions are made, right? So there's not a rule out there that says that, right? Yeah, it's stereotyping the hell out of some skinheads, and I'm not opposed to that, right? So this is going on YouTube too. I guess I gotta be careful. So strike that. Precedents for future cases with similar facts, right? So this situation that I found myself in, right? It becomes precedential, right? Like, so I can come and tell y'all, this is the situation I had dealing with these guys. Don't loan them your bike. And then you think, yeah, he's an idiot. He's never done that to begin with. But you do kind of internalize that. That's exactly how this legal system is working, right? This is the main point here. All this stuff accumulates over time. Enough people loan enough jerks their bikes, and the bike doesn't come back, and people realize, oh, yeah, don't loan your bike to jerks. So these all wind up becoming standards and traditions set by the community, and some of this stuff we don't even notice. Right? Some of this stuff we just kind of take for granted, but there it is. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about case law, and this is why lawyers sit around all day long and argue different cases and think about different case reasonings. And I have a friend of mine who teaches, for example, for the LSAT, the kind of questions they ask on that test, freaking bananas. Like he was reading me this question that he wrote the other day, a rationale for, and it dealt with putting a dolphin in a tub of water with mild electric shocks to the dolphin, and like why or why not it was okay if you put a football helmet on the dolphin, it would not be opposed to the electric shocks. That was the question, right? And these are the kinds of things they have to process through in terms of coming up, yes, very unreasonable stuff. Why? Because again, to go back to my first point, people do unreasonable things, right? So how do we figure out what to do with the situation with the dolphin in the bathtub? We gotta process through a lot of stuff and think about other cases of similar things where dogs were electrocuted or whatever. All right, here's a favorite, right? The old MRI suite. We've all seen pictures of, hopefully we've all spent some time on Google late at night looking at stuff that got sucked into an MRI scanner. I'm not alone on that one, am I, y'all? You feel me on that one? Because really random stuff gets sucked into MRI scanners. This is probably the most mild one that's out there, right? You can find like people pinned against the thing, and you know there are cases where people have died because of MRI scanners and stuff like that. You know, I don't know what this is. It looks like some kind of workstation on wheels would be my guess. So someone was like charting and like, let me get your last information while I go into the MRI. So the term for this kind of idiocy is we can't just say, oh, you're a moron. We say that's malpractice, right? Malpractice. It means bad form, basically, bad practice. We might call it misconduct of a professional. Sometimes it's illegal. More often it's an immoral or poorly informed decision. And it may show an unreasonable lack of skill on the part of that professional. So y'all are at this weird point in your career where you're doing these procedures, you're doing this stuff for the patient, but do we have enough skill to do this, right? Well, that's why we have competencies, right? And we'll come back to that here in a second, because for me, as an X-ray tech student, one of the first things I wonder is like, okay, how am I going to learn how to do this? Like, I don't even know how to loan people my bicycle. How am I going to learn how to be an X-ray tech, right, without hurting anyone, right? Good question. But guess what? There are already statutes and things in place that are guiding this whole situation, right? So has anyone wondered that? Like, how am I going to be an X-ray tech without hurting somebody? Yeah, okay, that's all I'm saying. So just because you do not have all the clinical skills that you have, there are things in place that are protecting you and the patient. Let's talk a little bit about breach of contract. You may not realize that you are under contract with every patient that you interact with, but you are. It's called an implied social contract, right? Where you go to that person and you say, I am of this X profession, right? Radiography or whatever, dental hygiene. And as a radiographer, as an X-ray tech, right? There are certain roles and responsibilities that I have to you as a patient, and I get certain benefits from that, right? So my responsibility is to take your X-ray without like irradiating your gonads, if at all possible, right? Without like messing up and taking an X-ray of your right knee when it was supposed to be your left elbow, right? So those are the kinds of things that the patient expects from me. In return, what they've given me is the right or the ability to be certified, to oversee my own schooling, right? And to some professional autonomy. Like I have some determination of how I'm going to take this picture of your X-ray, of your elbow, right? And if you think about it, it is kind of remarkable. I'm an X-ray tech. The only reason I'm teaching you as other X-ray techs is because of this social contract. So it's a far-reaching social contract, right? And it's an implied contract. But we can have a breach of contract if any part of that falls apart. So if I go out and I take Mr. Smith's X-ray when I was supposed to take Mrs. Jones's X-ray, that's a breach of contract. I just messed up in terms of my roles and responsibilities. Likewise, if I in some way fail to provide adequate treatment for the individual. So if in the course of taking the X-ray for this individual, I'm taking the right X-ray on the right person, and it seems like I'm doing my job right, but then the patient falls for some reason under my care, then I have not provided adequate care for that individual. All right, criminal law. This is basically not what we're talking about for X-ray, but we might as well go ahead and define what it is. Criminal law is like killing people and stuff, right? So criminal law deals with offenses against the state or society at large. This is a picture of a bunch of squirrels pulling a frozen squirrel out of the freezer, and it says, "Come with us, ma'am. If I were you, I'd get a good lawyer. No one's going to buy that 'my husband was only hibernating' story." Pretty good Far Side joke. Yeah, she froze her husband in the freezer. Those squirrels are malicious, y'all. They're cold-blooded. They're basically rats with bushy tails. Yeah. But so this isn't typically what we deal with medical malpractice. Now, are there cases of criminal infractions in hospitals? Heck yes, there are. Just listen to the podcast Dr. Death and you'll be scared witless, right? But for the most part, this is not what we're talking about. Oh, I hate these kinds of slides. Okay, so some legal terms that will give us an information on what we are talking about, right? Felonies versus misdemeanors. This is all criminal stuff, right? So felonies, serious crimes, shooting someone, that's a felony, right? Don't want to do that. It's punishable by imprisonment. Also, stealing stuff. So stealing a wheelchair from the hospital, I guess, would be a bad idea. Or drugs, right? That would be a felony. I don't know why I laugh so much about that. It never happened, all right? Yeah. I didn't have a bike, okay? All right. Misdemeanors. These are less serious crimes. Things like speeding is a misdemeanor, right? They can be punishable by fines. If you keep your theft of drugs under $250, and I don't know who wrote this slide, it wasn't me, but that's just a misdemeanor, right? It also depends on where you steal the drugs, what drugs you steal, and
on the state.
yeah, state that you steal the drugs in, whether the drugs are legal in that state or not. So do your homework before you steal any drugs from the hospital, all right? It's the rule here, I guess, with this slide. It depends on the state. Yes, right. How you stole the drugs, all that. Basically, don't steal drugs. And I know this slide doesn't make that case very strongly, but I'll say it anyways. All right, legal doctrines. Respondeat superior. So here's where we start to get into the Latin stuff. Okay, well, it means let the master respond. And I included this far side with a chicken in it because the chicken is saying, so then when old MacDonald turned his back, I took that axe and with a whack, whack, whack here and a whack, whack, whack there, I finished him off, right? So the problem with that situation is old MacDonald should never have turned his back on that homicidal chicken, right? The same thing is going on when in the course of our work as an x-ray tech, if we do something that was a poor decision on our part, right? But it was guided by an even poorer decision on the part of the physician or the administration of the hospital, then the master has to respond, right? So you might be wondering, okay, what are you talking about practically? If, for example, we are asked to do a whole lot of post-op hip x-rays, right? And we haven't yet looked at the hip, but the lateral hip x-ray, if it's done post-op, has to be done this cross-table way. And there's certain situations, certain ways you could do that exam where you wind up being in the way of the primary beam. One technologist has to hold the image receptor while the other one fires the machine, right? And it's a significant dose because people who, for the most part, need hip replacements, pretty big people, we got to give quite a bit of juice to get through all that soft tissue. So you might get a pretty hefty dose, right? If the employer or the hospital is saying, yeah, x-ray techs, you have to go in there and do this hip procedure this way, and all of a sudden all of our radiation doses are really high, right? That's on the hospital. They need to figure that out. Was it a bad decision on my part to do it? Yes, it was. But at the end of the day, I also still want to work, right? So if the hospital's telling me this is the way I have to do this, I'm going to continue to do it that way until something changes. Does that make sense? You've probably seen examples of this in your own course of clinical work or even at your own job already, right? Any examples that people have? Okay. Res ipsa loquitur. This means the thing speaks for itself. And the far side I have here is, I love this one too. Look, we know how you did it. How is no longer the question. What we want to know now is why. Why now, brown cow? That's classic, y'all. Oh my goodness.
What?
Why now, brown cow? Y'all don't remember? Okay, forget it. All right.
No, explain.
Okay, so the joke is, there's like the old nursery rhyme, like, how now, brown cow?
I don't know that.
We know how it did it. Doesn't matter. It was a dumb thing to do. Now the question is, why the hell would you ever do that, you dumb brown cow, right? You don't think that's funny?
I don't get it. And I don't really get it.
It's a nursery rhyme?
All right, forget about this. If
Google that.
the point of this is that sometimes things speak for themselves. Whatever this cow did, right? We don't care anymore. It was a dumb thing to do. Why would anyone do that, right? That's a res ipsa loquitur type situation. Why the heck would anyone do that, right? So, I mean, some of y'all were kind of thinking that in and of yourselves when I talked about loaning my bike to the skinhead jerk, right? Why would anyone do that, right? What a dork. Exactly. So the thing speaks for itself. Now, where this could come into play for us as x-ray techs is, okay, so we're doing I'm trying to think of stuff that's not too crass, but it has happened, right? This is fairly crass. What's a less crass thing? Okay, I'll put it in a less crass way. So putting the enema tip in the wrong place, right? Let's talk about that real quick, right? The thing speaks for itself, right? At some point, an individual should have realized this enema tip is not in the correct place, right? Now, for there to be an actual charge or something, some kind of harm has to occur, so we'll talk about that more in a sec. But in the case that the patient was injured through no fault of their own, but it was in the complete control of the technologist in this example, that is a res ipsa loquitur type argument that can be made against putting the enema tip in the wrong place. Doctrine of foreseeability. This man's driving a car with his dog's actually driving the car. I'm going to explain every single joke on this thing to y'all, by the way, because when you explain jokes to people, it makes them more funny. It doesn't, but I'm going to do it anyways. So the man's yelling at the police officer, and he's saying, "Hey, I'm not crazy. Sure, I let him drive once in a while, but he's never off his leash even a second, right?" You should foresee that that's going to lead to problems, right? Letting your dog drive a car. So this occurs when an individual could reasonably foresee that a certain action is going to cause injury to someone else, right? So classic example for me when I was an X-ray student, right, was I had a month where I racked up close to $6,000 of damages to my department, right? A lot of it was probably foreseeable stuff, but I was a student, right? So I wrecked the portable into the wall in the ICU, right? And frankly, the amount of money that they paid to patch the drywall there was a little excessive. I mean, I could have fixed it myself. But it was probably the most slow motion crash accident ever, right? Like, whoa, I can't stop it. Anyways, the big damage was actually not me, but I was working with the tech when he did this. He lowered the fluoro table onto a patient's bed. Fortunately, the patient wasn't in the bed at the time, but it broke the motor inside the fluoro table. That was a big ticket item, right? So I should have seen that wall was there in the ICU that I shouldn't have run into. Now, it wasn't really a doctrine of foreseeability thing because there wasn't a patient on the other side of the wall that got hurt, right? It was just an empty storage room, so I could just kind of and just kind of go off my way. But some nurse saw me and reported it.
That's where
Like,
it came from.
what? Yeah, so there's still some anger there, right? Okay.
That's where it came from. That's where it stemmed.
This was not here in Memphis, all right? I'm not going to disclose locations. All right. The doctrine of, they'll say that on YouTube. The doctrine of borrowed servant, right? So anytime you are being asked to do something, right? So the physician makes a request. They like to call them orders. I like to call them requests. You can ask me to do that nicely, but nobody's ordering anyone around here, right here. So doctrine of borrowed servant, when I'm working with the physician's request to do this chest X-ray or whatever, right? Then I'm basically borrowed for that specific purpose. Anywhere you're hired as an X-ray tech, you are a borrowed servant of the hospital system that you're working for, right? And I know that sounds kind of weird or whatever, but it's actually a helpful thing because it means that for the most part, the hospital is the primary responsible party, right, for how its employees are behaving. Now, we have seen examples of when hospital systems have to answer for behaviors of employees who aren't even on the clock, right? Like just even recently, there was that thing with the employee at, I won't name the hospital, but he was wearing a t-shirt while the individual was voting, right? Probably the guy who stole my bike. But that's that hospital had to think about, okay, this person's a borrowed servant for us, and even though he was off the clock at that moment, right, he's representing the hospital to some degree. So I got this Far Side comic of this woman who's working as a receptionist, it looks like, and there's a mummy there that says he's going to enact a curse on this man's family. If, for some reason, she gets caught between the man in the office whose the curse is on and the mummy, then she's just operating as a borrowed servant in that moment, right? I think that's enough said about that. All right, personal liability. This is the one that gets brought up the most. You are held liable for negligent or other actions that result in injury. The really operative word here is injury. For it to be considered negligence and for you to be held liable, there has to result in some kind of injury, right? Now, people have gotten pretty wild in defining all sorts of different kinds of injury, but that is a significant part of it. Okay. So when we talk about all of this stuff, pretty much that we've talked about, except for the misdemeanors and stuff, felonies and stuff, all that falls underneath civil law. And civil law may also be called tort law. So what is a tort? It's a civil wrong, and it falls under the civil law. So all of these things that I've just talked about, where people made dumb decisions, bad mistakes, or the examples that we heard, like people telling people to go out into the flora room, those could be considered torts if they result in any kind of injury. So this is the most common type of legal claim that happens in healthcare workers. It can be both intentional and unintentional things, and they result in kind of liabilities, right? So here's an example of an unintentional tort. I was a really bad driver when it came to the portable x-ray machine, and as a senior student, right, I ran over one of the junior students' foot. His foot got in my way. It was not my fault. He was talking to this girl, right? And there was this weird dynamic between them, even though they were both freaking married, and his foot should not have been in my way, right? So, enough said on that, right? Maybe there's a reason why people's foot gets run over, but that was actually unintentional, right? It was unintentional. I'm not going to tell you. This is like years ago, like donkey's years ago. All right. Who was it? So, injury can be to the person, to their property, or to their reputation, right? Anything that results from neglect or omission of reasonable care or caution between the patient and the professional can be considered neglect or malpractice, right? So what are the purposes of these tort laws? It provides a substitute for vengeance, right? Like I mentioned earlier, I couldn't go knock on that guy's door and say, man, I want my bike back now. You know? And practice that in front of the mirror for a little while until it sounds serious enough. It was not happening. Give me my bike.
He would have probably given it.
I doubt it. He always pawned it.
Yeah. He wound up joining Amway. Yeah. Yeah, it kind of changed my views of Amway. But it is going to find fault for wrongdoings and for inappropriate acts. And ultimately, will work to compensate the victim of wrongdoing, right? So, I got some money out of this jerk, this joker.
Did you get a new bike?
No, it wasn't enough for a new bike. Glad you think that's funny, Miss Wilson. It encourages adherence to the law, right? So maybe he'll go tell his other buddies not to steal anyone else's bike. And it can prove intent, right? Prove intent.
That's a dark past.
All right. All right, now we got, oh my goodness, that's misspelled.
That's a good test question.
That's really sad. All right, this is the way I remember this stuff, though. Intentional torts, things that someone did this stuff and it really hurt someone or caused them damage to their property. Assault is anything that's designed to make a person fearful. The way I remember it is like if I was brandishing a salt shaker at you and be like, give me my bike back, you jerk, with the salt shaker, right? Now, it appears that I am trying to make this person fearful, right? Can I really hurt them with a salt shaker? Probably not. Not unless I'm like a trained assassin, right? Like La Femme Nikita or something like that. Battery, though, if I'm coming at someone with a bat, right,
Yeah.
that could hurt, right? So assault is designed to make someone person feel fearful, versus battery is touching someone without his or her consent or hitting someone. That's the way I have the bat up there. Yes.
You could actually have assault with the bat as long as
You might be wondering, how on earth does this apply to me as an x-ray tech? Well, guess what? Doing an IV on someone without their consent potentially could be assault and battery, right? Because I just brandished a needle at someone and stuck it into their body, right? So if it's misunderstood or misinterpreted at some level, could be considered a form of assault and battery. Telling a nurse, get out of my way or I'm going to shoot you with this x-ray machine, right? If I actually power on the x-ray machine and shoot the nurse with the x-ray machine, that's assault and battery, right? Don't go shooting people with x-ray machines. Like I said, this seems very common sense, but I'm certain at some point in the history of this great nation, someone's going to have that bright idea and do it.
What if somebody comes back after the fact and says, even though you got consent, but then they come back and said, well, I really didn't understand, and so now...
That does happen. It's a good question. And so it just kind of stresses the importance of consent, 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 right? So by that I mean, when they come into any facility, they should be given those papers that say, yes, I consent to treatment here at this facility. I would encourage you to review those papers, make sure they're signed, that the appropriate date on there, it's not someone else's name, stuff like that. Because that is basically the one thing, that piece of paper is the one thing separating almost everything that we do as x-ray techs from assault and battery, right? Talking to patients and making sure that they are okay with me to touch them. Can I touch your shoulder to set you up for this exam, right? It's not that I'm some kind of weirdo who likes to ask people, can I touch them all the time? It's that I'm thinking about this stuff in the back of my mind, right? I do not want anything to be misconstrued, right? So those are good questions. All right, libel. Libel is when we write junk down, right? Particularly stuff that, it's basically all of Facebook, in my opinion, is a big libel party, right? Where it's like, oh my goodness, Facebook, my life is amazing, and all these other people's lives are garbage, you know? That's basically the way Facebook feels to me, but I clearly have some weird feelings. So if you're writing stuff that's meant to damage someone else's character or standing, that is libel, right? Now, if you keep it in a notebook or in a journal somewhere, like, oh my goodness, Dustin is a jerk, I hate him, and whatever, he broke my heart. Like, that's between you and God, and I don't think God cares if you libel someone. But if you start publishing your journal entries about how Dustin is such a jerk and how everyone should stay away from him. No one knows anyone named Dustin, right? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. All right. I was just trying to think of someone that we don't have in this classroom. I'm not talking, because that would be slander, which is not what I'm doing. I'm not talking about a real person named Dustin. So, slander is saying something about someone, right? So telling a patient, for example, gosh, that nurse you've got's a real dork, you know, like she couldn't titrate saline to save her life or something like that, you know. I don't know what I would say about a nurse. My mom's a nurse, so I can't think of mean things to say about nurses, but well, okay, that nurse that one time, she told everybody that I wrecked the portable into the ICU wall, and I didn't. She's a liar. The minute I said she's a liar, right, that is now slander, right? The minute I start to write nurse so-and-so is a liar on the men's room wall, that's libel, right?
Write it on a patient's board.
Yeah, right in the patient's chart. Your nurse.
Is a liar.
Yeah, your nurse today is liar. That would be golden. All right. False imprisonment. If the patient was restrained either physically by threat or intimidation without his or her consent. We do not restrain patients. We can immobilize patients and we can provide patient support, right? So a prime example of where this could be misconstrued is the pigostat, right? It is a form of immobilization. I am not going to call it a restraint. It is not physician ordered, but it is the best darn way to get that x-ray. Parents hate it. They hate it. In fact, when I was teaching some of the adverse childhood experiences stuff, I had a parent come up to me and said, "Oh, you're an x-ray tech. You're the ones who put the kids in those tubes that looks like you get it from the bank, and then you make them scream so you can get the picture." And I was like, I understand your frustration, nice person. But the reality is the main concern that I have right then is that we're not exposing the child to excess amounts of radiation, right? So it is our job as an x-ray tech to explain very clearly to a parent who's in a whole lot of stress and duress about their child that I'm going to use a device that will immobilize your child so that we don't have to expose them to too much radiation, right? And to make that as clear and concise as possible so that nothing is misconstrued. I am not doing any kind of false imprisonment, right? Now, y'all have probably seen some patients who come in restraints, right? That is physician ordered. You can go to the chart. This person needs restraints because they're trying to pull out their IV every 5 seconds, or they're trying to hit people, or whatever, right? You may be even brought into situations where you have to assist the physician in restraining someone, right? I worked at, like I said, trauma level 1 ER. My uncle was a physician there as well. We had a lot of drunk cowboys on Friday nights, and they like to fight. Drunk cowboys do. So there was more than one occasion, especially once methamphetamine hit the Cowtown saloon scene, people came in swinging, right? And we had to restrain people, right? It looked like a bar fight, but it was physician-ordered restraint, okay? So that is something that if the doctor says, help, or this person's attacking me, or it's clear that the situation needs to be brought into hand, I'll let you deal with that as you see best. I enjoy a little dust up every now and then. So, especially if bikes are involved. All right. Just in case any of y'all get any plans with my bike out there, all right? Just, yeah, you think you can trust people and then you bring your bike in. All right. So, if restraint is necessary for safety purposes, get some consent. So before I put the patient into the pigostat, Mom, need to put this, your baby, cute baby, in the thing, right? Are you okay with that? No, I'm not. Well, here's the thing, Mom. I'm going to shoot it to you straight. Either we put the baby in there and we get this picture this way, or we have to figure out some crazy way to get the picture without the baby busting its skull open, right? So explaining to them and getting their consent, their permission, right? And those can be pretty heated conversations or whatever. You really have to spell things out with them. Try to use an intrusive method. And get the doctor's orders in writing, or just discontinue. Don't do it. We use restraints, something like restraints, quite a bit in CT, right? Quite a bit in CT. We will strap people to the table in CT. We will strap their heads to the thing. If they're ETOH, if they're drunk, if they've got a stroke, those kinds of things. Person's combative because they've been doing that weird bath salt stuff, right? We will tape their heads to the gantry, right? Are we restraining the person? Yes, we are. Is the person out of their mind, and did the physician order the exam? Yes, they did. But it's a big gray area. I probably shouldn't even talk about that on the internet. Oh, YouTube. I love YouTube so much, but there's also a part of me that just hates YouTube. Best of all the social media. Okay. Invasion of privacy. Now, make sure that your patients are covered at all times. And if they can't be covered for whatever reason, explain to them why the procedure does not permit them to be covered, right? The standard pattern that I would offer patients, especially in radiation therapy, were basically all day long I had to look at women's breasts, right? That's what you do as a radiation therapist. You're either treating breasts or you're treating prostates, right? So that's what you're looking at all day long. I would explain to patients all the time, look, I cannot always maintain your modesty, right? But I can maintain your decency, your sense of dignity, right? I think that saved my butt a lot in all honesty. I can think in particular about patients that I treated that were Muslim, right? Women who are Muslim. Big issue, right? But I would carefully explain that to them. So in all cases, do everything you can to maintain people's sense of dignity, right? And allow them to choose how they want to cover themselves up, when at all possible, okay? Another way that privacy can be invaded, though, so that'd be personal body space and privacy and stuff like that. But another probably more important one to some degree is HIPAA, right? And I know this is kind of one of those things that's just kind of like standard. It's back there in the back of your mind, like HIPAA, whatever. Don't want to talk about people. Don't want to post on Facebook about this weird patient that I saw today or whatever, right? And by the way, every patient care situation I've mentioned in this video, completely false and erroneous. I'm not mentioning anything in terms, I'm making stuff up. Why? Because of HIPAA. Read between the lines. So, So the purpose for HIPAA, right, is to protect people's privacy. It is also really there to protect you as well. Okay? So if a patient or someone calls up, hey, I need this report or whatever, HIPAA is there to protect your time as well, because you have like a month to surrender that information, right? So you don't need to run around distributing information all the time. The important thing is to maintain confidentiality and keep the patient covered as much as possible. All right, torts of outrage. This is a person's conduct is causing emotional distress. It was extreme and dangerous, and the stress was severe, and no one should have to endure it. This is probably hands down my favoriteest Far Side comic of all time. Is this guy standing on the side of the road dressed like a bird with a bird cage on his head and a mallet and a punching glass, and it's also got little springs on his shoes. And the cop is saying, well, I'll be darned, I guess he does have a license to do that. That's great. That is so good. I mean, come on, y'all. I feel like I'm in some kind of weird generation gap. Like, you don't want people to read Far Side comics to you? All right, fine. So this guy is committing a tort of outrage? No, he's not. He's got a license to be doing it, right? So just be aware of that situations where people are doing stuff that's extreme and outrageous could eventually be construed that way. An example of where we see this, right? Anyone who's listening to the Dr. Death podcast, there are torts of outrage that are mentioned in that. Probably the most common tort of outrage that we hear almost every day is, I'm the frickin' doctor, right? If the person's doing something that legit should not be done, right, you just crossed the line, partner, right? And just because you're a doctor doesn't mean you go around doing all this kind of crazy stuff to people, right? What do we have to protect ourselves? Well, one of the first things is incident reports. Report the heck out of everything and use the ethic hotline. I do. They like talking to me. Do it as soon as possible after the incident occurred, right? And I mean, call everything an incident, you know? There was one time at one hospital I was working at, literally every day I filled out an incident report every single time I was there.
Oh, that's awful.
Now, yes, it was a tough place to work. It was a rough place to work, right? But I can think of facilities here in the greater Memphis area where if I was working there, I know I'd be filling out incident reports every single day, right? Why? I'm trying to get people to listen and see that processes are broken, right? I'm not just trying to be a squeaky wheel or whatever. I'm trying to blow the whistle and make people wake up to problems. So the purpose of them is to encourage proper interactions with the patient and decrease likelihood of claims against the hospital, right? So I'm actually doing the hospital a favor, and we want to avoid similar things in the future. Interestingly enough, like that sounds crazy, that sounds excessive to fill out an incident report every single day, right? You talk to people in other forms of work. Like for example, who was I talking to the other day? I think it was a construction worker. He's working on the tower over here at Methodist. They had to fill out an incident report. They had to identify an incident every month. And if they didn't identify an incident, they had to make one up, right? Why? Because the company was constantly looking for processes to improve. Another example, the GE Hot Lab. I was talking to the guy who manages the hot lab for GE out at Trinity. GE requires them to report an incident every week. They had to identify an important incident, right? We know that mistakes happen, and the only way we can improve from them is to learn from them. So if we can't even identify them, how are we ever going to learn, right? Here's what that kind of form might look like. So, negligence must have 3 things, or 4. Breach of duty. Person should not have been doing that. Injury or actual damages to the patient. Proximate cause, which means that they have to prove that what I did resulted in this injury, right? And then finally, duty or competence. There has to be an expected level of competence there. So, what does this look like for us as X-ray techs? So, as an X-ray tech, I go out and I do call for Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones, please come back for your CT scan, right? Mrs. Jones stands up, right? She comes on back. She's a young female patient, let's say. I'm going to do your CT scan of your abdomen and pelvis, Mr. Jones. Still talking to her like I'm completely lost my mind or something, right? Lay the patient down on the exam table, do a CT scan on this pregnant female patient, right? I have just done a number of things that are on this list, right? Breach of duty. I did not even check to make sure I had the right person. I caused injury and actual damages that can be measurable now, right? So we'll have to call in the health physicist at some point. Proximate cause. It's clear that my actions resulted in the injury, right? I'm the one who initiated the CT scan. And there's a lack of competence on my side. I don't even know how to call back a patient for a CT exam, right? Or how to check and make sure I'm doing the right exam on the right person. Here's an example of that. This is actually an MRI of a patient who's pregnant. I have seen CTs of pregnant patients, so I know this seems crazy, but it does happen. When we talk about proving a standard of reasonable care, what the question is what would a prudent practitioner have done on under similar or same circumstances? So they'll call in an expert witness, right? They call in Mr. Rohrbacher, come in to hear the case of Mrs. Jones versus Mr. Roberts, right? And they'd ask you, Mr. Rohrbacher, when you go to call a patient back, do you check to make sure that the patient you called back is the patient you called back? And you'd say, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Your Honor. And do you then make sure that the exam that was ordered is the exam that you perform on the patient, et cetera, et cetera? And they would go through this whole thing to prove that a reasonable individual would have not done anything that I just did, right? In addition to that, it's also helpful to know that the ART sets these professional standards, as well as the ASRT has what's called scope of practice, right? One example of a place where I've seen breaches of the ASRT scope of practice, and y'all have, I think some of us have seen this, is people who are using fluoro guidance for X-ray examination. Outside of your scope of practice, right?
No.
Very clearly delineated by the ASRT as a do not do this, right?
Wait, they tap the fluoro.
You can
Fluoro, I'm going to fluoro to make sure I got a perfect lateral, and then bam, lateral.
It's peaking.
It's peaking. They tap the fluoro.
Just going to peek. Make sure you got a good
I
picture.
mean, I haven't seen it in person, but I've seen
Yeah.
stuff.
You see stuff, right? Is that a way to provide optimal care to all the patients? No. It actually is costing the hospital money, too. How would we fix it? Well, the person needs to be educated on how to shoot a freaking lateral chest x-ray. Like, at some point in time, they missed that lesson, right? Because nowhere in my manuals does it say fluoro the patient until make sure that they're in a true lateral, right? It's actually not being a team player, right? So we can just see how this stuff is kind of a cascading snowball effect. And eventually what you wind up is dun-dun-dun legal standards, right? Now, the reason I say dun-dun-dun legal standards is because this. Even though we've got things like res ipsa loquitur, or let the master reply, or the fact that you're working underneath this healthcare organization, right? At the end of the day, there's enough tort law out there where technologists have been found liable for neglect and malpractice that I don't think you have the coverage that you used to have. If you're operating within the best interests of the organization and the best interests of the patient, you probably are covered. If you start to go maverick and start to fluoro people just because that's what you want to do, you probably are not covered anymore. So how does the defense work for negligence? We have to talk about contributory negligence. This would be a situation in which the plaintiff failed to act reasonably and contribute to their own injury. Example of this is, Mr. Smith, please remain on the examination table while I look at the pictures, right? Mr. Smith has been cogent, he's been responsive with me, but right now he's ticked off and he wants to go talk to his friend Bob about fishing, right? So he jumps up off the x-ray table, slams his head against the tube, and falls on the floor and breaks his hip, right? That is, the plaintiff, in this case, failed to act reasonably. I told him to remain on the examination table. He chose to jump off of it and bang his head. Comparative negligence. Both parties are at fault. This would be a situation in which Mr. Smith has not been very responsive. He appears to be kind of moving in and out of consciousness. I tell him, look, hold still, right? And he doesn't hold still. I should have realized that Mr. Smith was not responding very well to my commands and that he needed some help in understanding that I expected him to hold still a little bit longer. Thinking about the assumption of risk, this is a case in which the plaintiff knows about the risk and consents anyway, right? This is pretty much every x-ray procedure that we do is done underneath the providence of assumption of risk. So we want to make sure that the patients have filled out their consent form prior to being x-rayed. Why? Because what we're doing presents risks to them. All right, to prevent malpractice, make sure you are competent, that you're in compliance and that your site is in compliance. You're charting everything that you do. I did the chest x-ray on Mr. Smith, 2 views, right? Communicating appropriately with everyone, maintaining confidentiality, so it's just all C's, and then being courteous. Being courteous will go a long freaking way, right? Even if it's a heated situation, if you maintain your calm and your courtesy, chances are you'll be okay. And finally, carefulness, right? And by carefulness here, I mean like being someone who actually cares about improving patient care and things like that. All right, the patient does have rights, and actually these rights are helpful. The very first one is right to refuse an exam or treatment. I do this all the time. I show up for Mr. Smith's CT scan. I don't want a damn CT scan. Okay, I'll be back.
Yeah.
Thank you, I got Tetris to play, right? So the patient has a right to refuse the exam pretty much at any time during the exam. So if a patient becomes combative with me or abusive to me, it's my understanding that you do not want this exam. Is that right? No, I want the exam. Well, then shut your freaking pile. You know, you're distracting me. Okay. They have a right to privacy, right? Which means not talking about what you saw during the day at the hospital, being respectful of their personal privacy. They have a right to be free of risk of injury, right? And that's why I'm going to make sure my consent forms are all filled out and everything prior to doing any exams. Right to determine, to be the determiner of what is done, right? I use this one quite a bit as a CT technologist. I was a facility that I was worked at where I was being asked to do more and more CT scans on pregnant women, right? CTs of their chest to rule out pulmonary embolism, because there's an increased incidence of pulmonary embolism with pregnant women. I would explain to those women very carefully, look, we're going to do a CT examination. I'm going to wrap you in lead, but your baby will be irradiated in the course of this exam, right? Are there risks with that? Yes, there are. These are the risks, right? Are we out from under the window from some more severe risks? Yeah, I'm not even going to mention them to you, right? But do you need to know about these risks? Yes, you freaking do, right? Why are you doing this to me? Why are you just a crazy CT tech who likes to work in the midnight in hospital and irradiate pregnant women? Yes, I am. But at the same time, there's a greater risk that you've got a pulmonary embolism, right? So which risk would we rather right now? Like, mom dies of pulmonary embolism along with baby, right? Or like the risk that I'm talking about in terms of radiation, right? Now, I would not explain it to them like that. That's a really cold-blooded way to explain something to someone. But at the end of the day, what would it look like if we seriously believed that the patients had the right to determine their care, right? It would look very different than what you're seeing in the hospitals right now. And that's my point. Right to be considerate and respectful, right? So we cannot call people names, in other words. Like, why? Well, it's actually in the Bill of Rights. Right to complete and current information from the doctor. So again, I've got doctor underlined here because if a patient presses me about, oh, what'd you see? I'm the cameraman, all right? The doctor's the director here. He's going to be the one calling the shots. Well, I have a right to know that whatever you found on that. Yes, you do. You have a right to hear about it from the doctor. Yep, not from me. So it's a nice CYA right there. Right to informed consent, and that should also say from the doctor. Right to know the name of the technologist and others. So did you know that? They have a right to know your name. My name is Ben Roberts. I've worked in CT for 14 plus years. I'll be doing your exam today. Right to reasonable response to requests. Generally, that's like requests for information and stuff like that. And it's defined more stringently in other places. Right to know about doctor's conflict of interest. What are we talking about here? Well, the doctor happens to work for the CT manufacturer who you've been ordered to go have a CT scan at, right? They need to know that. Where the doctor thinks you should have your hip replaced with this hip replacement that he happens to have a controlling interest of, right? Now, there's been recent breaches of this, right? One of the most interesting ones that I've seen had to do with artificial intelligence. There was a hospital in New England area that was taking cell samples from people, and they had some really crazy consent form that people had accidentally signed. And what they were doing is they were taking these cell samples and they were doing machine learning. They were doing deep learning with the cell samples, so that the computer eventually could look at cell samples and say, yeah, that's cancer, that's not cancer, that's tuberculosis, right? So the patients didn't know that the hospitals were harvesting their cell samples and using it. And the board of the hospital was benefiting from it. They owned the company that was going to release the software, right? So if they just left it with the consent and we're doing deep learning with this computer and it's going to help people, fine, right? But they had to go one step further and own controlling interest in the company. Finally, a right to be advised if they are part of an experiment, right? Now this might seem kind of nutty, but there's a real need for this, especially when we look at the history of X-ray and radiation stuff in our country. The U.S. public has been subjected to radiation experiments without their knowledge by government-funded researchers, right? So we have cases. The Clinton administration released a big document called the Human Radiation Experiments. It's as thick as a phone book, and it documents cases in which, for example, convicts were injected with plutonium. Children in orphanages were asked to eat radioactive-laced food. A lot of them did not understand what they were consenting to, right? This was, again, government-funded research. So patients have a right to know if they're under any kind of experiment, whether it's a survey or anything else. Liability. You are covered by the college's liability insurance. So if all this stuff is freaking you out right now, that's fine. It should be a little freaky to talk about this stuff. The employees at the hospital are under the liability insurance of the hospital, right? So your liability is held right now by the college. It's one of the things you're paying for to go to school here, and one of the reasons we're able to manage clinical stuff for people. And it's required. So it's required for each one of you every year. Okay. So in summary, we've answered what is a law, right? We've talked about what laws are and how that they come about, particularly where do laws come from. In the civil domain, we've said has to do with case law. Who is liable? It's basically people who cause injury, whether it's intentional or unintentional, right? Whether that's injury of persons or property or character or what have you. We've talked a little bit about HIPAA and how it relates to patient privacy and things like that. We've defined what the standard of reasonable care is. We talked about the court case where Mr. Rohrbacher is providing professional testimony against me, right? And we've mentioned ways that we can protect ourselves. It was basically those C's of how to avoid malpractice, plus the fact that you're covered by liability insurance. Thank y'all.